has been created. It's got a little icon down here indicating that this measure is only useful in this one visual. So we can see very easily that this is separate from all of the DAX measures that we've written and saved with our model. But this is a good time to highlight, though, one of the limitations of these visual calculations. So we don't have any formatting options. So we're not in terrible shape here, right? We've got 1,000 separators. We've got a couple decimals, so we're following most of the formatting from the two measures that we just used to create this new visual calculation. But we don't have a dollar sign. So we can apply the format DAX function if we really need that. I was digging around a little bit in their blog on this. They're aware that there's no formatting at Microsoft and plan to release that later in the future. But as of today, that is a current limitation. Okay, so pretty easy to get that. That new calculation in. But what's really cool about these is they've actually built out some little templates. So if we click on this FX icon, this is where we really get to see that these visual calculations can make writing DAX a little faster and a little easier. So let's say we wanted to create like a running sum of our tip plus fare measure. So once we do that, we get this new running sum function. All we have to do is pop a field in here. So if I start writing tip plus fare, I can reference my first visual calculation. And now I have a running sum. My visual. It's a little weird having a running sum going across all these years. What's cool is that once we create a visual calculation, we can edit it. Just right click on that particular calculation and hit edit. We get it right back here in the field well. And we can experiment then with these optional parameters. And now I've just forgotten. I just forgot what the syntax is. I made great notes except for that. But basically, we could set a partition by here to get. Let's see if it's. Yeah, there it is. The highest parent. We can actually partition this to reset our running sum based on the highest parent level within our visual, in this case, the year. Okay. So we didn't hardly have to write any DAX to get a nice running sum. If we wanted to write that same measure in our model, we'd have to write a little more DAX and take into account all kinds of filter contexts and date contexts and all kinds of stuff to get that to work. What makes these visual calculations really nice is that we don't really have to be concerned with that anymore. These visual calculations understand what's going on in the visual and are really looking more at the rows and columns of the visual to get their context. So if you dig further into their blog post about this, there will be a really nice explanation that'll help you understand that further. But really with just a few clicks and hardly having to type at all, we've got a couple useful measures that we can apply. One of the coolest ways I thought this could apply is really creating some quick down and dirty visuals. So a lot of times if we look at a trend chart like this one, this is just taxi rides across the same time periods that we saw in the matrix. A lot of times people want to see these peaks and valleys get smoothed out. So we can use the templates to do moving averages. pop a field in here. So my base taxi rides measure and a window size. Let's say we want to do 3 months. Now we get a line for that. And do another one. Put a 6 month on there. This is another example where we'd have to write more DAX than just using this one measure in our model to get a chart that would look something like that. Give us our base measure with all the smoothed out lines. So I think these visual calculations have a really great potential in helping us to get more complex visuals like this one put together quickly. I think just like with a lot of preview features, there's a few limitations we've got to work past. May not work in every scenario, but if you've got some measures that don't need to be reused across multiple visuals, or just something that you need to create very quickly, I think these visual calculations have a lot of great potential to help us get cool viz pretty fast. All right. So Fabric's got a lot of new updates in February 2024 as well. Of course, all of the aforementioned Power BI updates are part of that. Lots of Copilot stuff going on here as well. Kind of cool to have some Git integration through REST APIs. That looks like that's going to be really interesting. Lots of updates in the KQL space if you're working with real-time analytics. Excel was a little bit quiet in the February update. Probably the biggest thing to note is that there are some new default themes that are part of Office that you'll see. In Power Apps, again, lots of Copilot stuff becoming more available, and some cool things happening there. Same with Power Automate in the desktop. And with that, that's enough for me talking. Let's jump over to Michael for our feature presentation and learn more about requirements gathering.
Well, thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Before you leave, there was a quick question whether or not the visual calculations optimizes performance and makes things run faster. Certainly, I think the most obvious benefit is in making the writing of the calculations faster, even potentially almost not even having to write them at all. But any idea how it affects performance? Does it make things run faster or slower?
You know, I haven't done enough tests on it yet
Yeah.
to know. I would have to imagine that at least in some scenarios, especially on the time intelligence side, it's probably going to be fast.
Yeah. I mean, I would say some of these, I think that there are some of these functions that just didn't exist before. Some of these functions were created specifically for the visual calculations. And I saw this interesting video from Alberto Ferrari recently, where he was saying that there's now a third context that people have to be aware of. There's filter context, there's row context, now there's shape context, which has to do with the shape of your visual. So your shape had year and month, and so you could also have had something else in the column headers as well. And so that shape now makes it's so you can run the performance analyzer, get the DAX query that specific visual actually sends across the wire, and that DAX query, is rather complicated. And the more complicated the quote unquote shape is, the more complicated that visual becomes. And so I would more than thinking about whether it's faster or slower, I'm not sure, but I think that some of those things just simply either weren't possible or only possible if you wrote the measure knowing exactly what the shape of the visual was going to be, and you wrote it for that visual, knowing that it's going to look like this, and this is the, because you're talking about having to adjust the filter context and so forth. And so you have to write the measure knowing what filter context was inside the visual, what filter context might be coming from outside the visual. And so you had to write a very specific measure, and it would have been very complicated. The more complicated the measure is, the slower it's probably going to run. And this not only speeds up that development time, but it's also, I mean, I would think it might maybe make things faster, but even more, it's just going to make things possible that before were either impossible or just impractical. So I think that's the real benefit, is just speeding up development time.
Yeah, great. I mean, that moving average isn't particularly complex stacks to write if your model is set up well. So it'd be interesting to put together two visuals and run the analyzer on them.
Yeah, yeah.
Perhaps that's an experiment for soon.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll let Alberto run that experiment.
Right.
So somebody else mentioned, faster from the aspect of it's limited to a single visual and not reaching back to the model. I mean, yeah, so that's a good point, that like if that you create this measure and it's only in that visual, so it's not in your model, which means that that logic is not reusable. And not reusable is kind of a minus, but there's also the positive that you're not cluttering up your model with logic that may only be used in one place. It's very specific to one application. I get tons and tons of requests for oh, like make this green if it's a Saturday or something like this, and so that's great, but like now I've got this one business logic that exists for one purpose, and I can either create it and hide it, or I expose it, and now everybody's like, well, what in the world is this? Or they use it by mistake and get the wrong answer or get no answer, and then they come to me and ask me why it's not working the way they expect. So I think that's the real selling point for me, is being able to keep the model clean, intact, and reusable, scalable, and then have those little specific bits and pieces in the places where they're actually used. I really appreciate that feature.
Yep. I think there's probably one thing to I wouldn't say beware or be scared of it, but to be aware of that, you start adding like 30 of these visual calculations to one visual, that number's a bit exaggerated, but it's also possible you could be slowing down your visual compared to doing it a different way. Again, I haven't really tested all of that to know for sure. It'll be some fun things that we'll get to do as this feature matures, but it looks like something that has a lot of promise for us. So it's going to be fun to play with.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's see. Give me 1 second here. Just 1 second, please. Shared the wrong thing. So I apologize. I might have to leave and rejoin. Just bear with me 1 second, please.
While we're waiting on Michael to jump back, are there any other questions on visual calculations or any of the other updates from this month?
Okay, sorry about that. Michael, can you hear me and can you confirm that you're seeing my screen?
I hear you and see your dashboard in the day slide.
Wonderful, thank you. I apologize for that. I must have been a system update on my Mac and it needed some new permissions for Microsoft Teams. We're actually looking at switching over to Zoom, by the way, just FYI. Got a couple of snags with Microsoft Teams. So let us know what you think. I'm looking at switching this to Zoom, so hopefully that will be a little easier for folks. So yeah, thank you, Michael, for that great intro. Love those the visual calculations. I think it's going to be really exciting. And so just wanted to remind people about this. So you can snapshot the QR code, go to that link. And so basically I'm putting on a free dashboard in a day presentation. Saturday, June 1st is going to be all day. So more details on that to come. But basically it's a forum just to sort of show your interest. So if you click on that, put in your name, email, phone number, and then I'll be in touch in the future about more details. I will say, like I say, it is free. It's going to be all day on a Saturday, so just be ready for that. And this is very much a beginner presentation. Some of you guys are not going to be beginners. That's perfectly fine. This may not be the class for you, so just be mindful of that. That you know, that you might want something a little bit more advanced. This is really geared for people who are just starting out. Maybe they've never created a report in Power BI, or they created a few. They know they need some best practices, some standards, some beginning introduction. We're going to go into things like how do you bring data into Power BI? How do you clean it up? How do you model it? How do you create measures, building reports, publishing to the service? How do you share that content with others? So really basics, but it's a lot of basics that's going to go a long way. It's going to be very heads down. So like, well, it's a blend, right? So I'm going to sort of go through some lecture-based content, and then we're going to do it together. So I'm going to show you the idea, the concept, how to do it, and then you guys are going to actually do it with me. And then as there are questions, I'm going to be there to help you guys do this. That's why it's limited to 20 people, because it's very interactive. I'm going to be there to help you as you have questions. So again, that's why I say this is really for beginners and people who are kind of just starting out. Just so you know, Dashboard of the Day is a curriculum that's created by Microsoft, and they update it all the time. They update it several times a year. So this is really well created, well maintained content, and they're constantly enhancing that as new features come out so that the content is relevant and up to date. So if you are someone, or if you know someone who might be interested in this, I encourage you, please send them that link, send them the QR code. We'll have it in some of the notes for this meetup that will come out later. So I encourage you guys to sign up. Like I say, it's going to be limited to 20 people, just so that I can have bandwidth for everybody who might need help. So with that, let's get into something that's also, I think, very important, but also fundamental, kind of beginner. I mean, it's beginner level, but really it's something that I think is beneficial and necessary all the way throughout your career in communicating and managing projects, managing BI projects. And that is, how do you create a good foundation for the work that you're going to do? And it's like some BI projects, they might last for a few weeks. Some of them might last for a year or even more. I've got a major project that I'm working on that we've been working on this for almost a year and a half. It's currently looked at by over 1,000 people every week. And so it's a really high visibility project. And so you can imagine that the requirements for that are really well documented. And not everything is going to need the same level of sort of weight put behind it. So we're going to go into some of the things that you might want to think about. And so this really is kind of tool agnostic. We do a lot of Power BI here. but the principles that I'm going to go over, you could use for Tableau, for Click, for a lot of different things. So if there's any one thing that I want you guys to take away from today's session, other than that dashboard in the day that I was showing you guys, it is the first four words on this slide, and that is to design backwards and build forwards. I'm going to share that with you guys. I'm going to show you what I mean when I say that. But if there's any one thing I want you to take away from today, this is the basic philosophy: to design backwards and build forwards. And we're going to go over what that looks like in a moment. But the very first thing that you want to start with is the why. So the why behind a project is basically why are we here to do this? Why is the company investing all this money into this, right? So if I've committed 10, 20% of my time over the last year and a half, and other people, we've had maybe 8 or 10 people who have been significantly involved on that one project I was mentioning, along with several other projects. You can imagine the company has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in total on that one project. And so it's fair to be able to ask, why is it important to the company? Why would they want to spend that kind of money? And so understanding the why behind any BI project or reporting project, I think is really, really important to the success of that project. If you don't know why you're doing it, then I think you're not very likely to produce an outcome that is really satisfying that purpose. And so there are kind of three things that I will oftentimes say to people. That basically are getting at the same thing, right? It's not three different things. These are all the same thing, just different ways to word it. And so that is, what is the question you're trying to answer? What's the insight you're trying to gain? What's the hypothesis you're trying to test? Basically, what is the information that you need and why do you need it, right? That can provide some insight that'll help you frame the work that you do. But basically, what do you want to solve with this report that is not solved now? What is the pain point that you're trying to resolve for your stakeholder and your report consumer? That information is really going to drive the rest of the work that we do here. Now, in order to get that why, you need to sort of sit down with your stakeholder, your counterparty, your report consumer, and really have a conversation with them around what it is that they need. And I'll be honest with you, it is not uncommon that someone doesn't know what they need, or they think they know what they need, but they really don't. I oftentimes refer to Steve Jobs, and I say that Steve Jobs, he didn't sell us the iPhone we told him we wanted. Steve Jobs sold us the iPhone we never knew we needed. And that is the difference that you sometimes will have to tease out. That a lot of times you'll go to a stakeholder, maybe they're not very technical, they know they don't know what they need. Sometimes they do know what they need, and you've got this in between where sometimes they think they know what they want, but they really don't. And then you can't just say, well, you're wrong, you need this, but you do need to be able to sort of bring them along in this conversation of, well, let's talk about what your needs are, how you run your book of business, how can we provide data to help you run that book of business in a more data-based way, right? And so one thing that I'll oftentimes say, you'll hear this if you follow entrepreneurship at all, is to not be a solution in search of a problem, right? You want to make sure that you are solving the pain point that somebody actually has, and not just create something neat and fancy that you think is really cool and hope that someone's going to find it useful. Because you might find it really cool, but if it's not actually solving a problem somebody really has, odds are they're not going to find a lot of value in it, right? So once you've identified the why, we understand the reason why we're all at the table together. What's the next step? So the next thing that you want to do is you want to wireframe. And so a wireframe, and it goes by different names. So you can call it a wireframe, you can call it a mock-up, you can call it a stick figure. There's different names that all mean the same thing. But basically, you just need some kind of visual representation of what you're ultimately going to deliver. And it, this visual can be as sophisticated or as unsophisticated as you need it to be. So you can literally use marker on a dry erase board. I've done that a ton. You're actually going to see some of that in a moment. And one great thing about that is when you're in the room with your stakeholder, and you can do it on the fly with the stakeholder in the room, really gets their brain thinking about how they're going to interact with the report that you build. And if you create something and it's no good, you've spent 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then you erase a part of it, and you go back to something else. You move on to something else, and you see if you can refine it and make it better. And it's a very, very rapid form of iteration, trying new things and seeing what works. I've seen a ton of people who they get some marching order from a boss, they go away for a week, 2 weeks, they come back, present their results, and the boss sort of, kindly says, "Well, thank you very much for your hard work, but this doesn't really solve my pain point." If you had spent some time in the room to figure that out ahead of time before you built it, then that makes for a much faster turnaround. So let's say that you're going to present this wireframe to say like a CEO or someone very senior. You might want to kind of plus this up a little bit. And I've used, pen on graphing paper. You can get sort of very precise with that. I've used PowerPoint, I've used Visio, I've used tons of different tools. It really depends on what you're familiar with and what you want to use. If you're super fast in Visio, great, knock that out. You can build some really amazing things in Visio. You can do some pretty good things in PowerPoint. I find it to be a little bit time consuming, so I don't tend to do a ton of stuff in PowerPoint unless I'm presenting to someone very senior. Um, you know, but it's always a great idea to have some kind of wireframe that tells you where you're going to go. Even if it's marker on a dry erase board, just get your phone out, take a snapshot of that, and it's way better than having nothing. I can't guarantee you that if you build a wireframe, you're going to succeed, but I can almost guarantee you if you don't build a wireframe, you're going to be going in circles for a long, long time. Okay, so once you've got that wireframe built, so what's next? So the next thing you want to do is you want to identify the data sources that you need, right? So when I say wireframe, like that wireframe needs to be pretty specific. So it should tell you, like, on my x-axis, I want this category. The height of my column is going to be this. I've got this bubble chart over here. My x and y are these. The size of the bubble is this. The colors between the bubble is something else. And you should have an idea of what each of those things is. That now tells you what the minimum data that you need to build this report that you've wireframed. Now, you might want to bring in some other data that could be useful for future requests. Since you're already there, might as well build it out rather than creating something, rather than having to go back to the well, get more data every time there's a new request. That's a reasonable approach. And there's some reasons why you might or might not want to do that. Uh, you know, but this gives you your necessary data, your minimum necessary data to build the report as you've wireframed it. So now you understand your why. You have a wireframe for the report that you're going to build, and then that allows you to inventory that minimum necessary data to build your report. So now the next step is you need to go figure out where that data lives. More than likely, every bit of that data, or almost all of that data, exists somewhere in a system within your enterprise. It's going to exist on an ERP system, maybe some travel management system, some third-party software. It might exist in a database, or could just be on a spreadsheet on somebody's computer desktop. But somewhere that data exists, and you need to figure out where that data lives. And that involves conversations with lots of different folks to try to figure out where you might find that data. If you've been at your company for 20 years, you probably have had those conversations. You know the people to talk to. You might have all the answers already. You might have all that data already. But if you're brand new, if you're, 22 and starting out fresh, you might have a lot of learning to do to figure out exactly where to go get all of that. So once you've located where the data is, now you want to begin building out your ETL. And the first thing to do that is figure out what that architecture is going to look like. And honestly, some of that may be decided for you based on the topography of your organization. So in other words, if you've got an ERP system and it's pretty typical for people to export out of CSV, and that's something that's supported, that might be a well-laid path for you that gets you to a solution more quickly, maybe. And maybe that's something, that might be the path that you go down simply because it's what is available to you. It's what the security folks are willing to allow you to do, right? So some of this architectural decisions, they might be made for you ahead of time, right? And so you might, for example, say, okay, like I want to, export out of my ERP into CSVs and then load that into a database because I want to retain that permanently. And then we're going to load that into Power BI. And so for example, that what you need to build. So we need to build or have access to storage. We need to build the export jobs in the ERP system to export those CSVs. You need pipelines to load that into the database. You need Power Query queries to load it into Power BI. So a lot of different things that you're going to want to build. Now, maybe you can just get a connector that goes straight to your ERP system, and that's okay too. That might be something that works if that's an option for you. But so after you've decided on what that architecture should look like for you, the next thing that you want to do is actually go build those pipelines. So that's when you go to the trouble of actually building the things that we've now designed. So I want to sort of pause here for a second, go back to those 4 words that I told you that I want you to leave you with: design backwards and build forward. So what we've done here is we've started at the finish line. So our finished deliverable is a report that our report consumers, our stakeholders can use to help them manage their book of business and mitigate a pain point in their lives. So if our deliverable is that report, we've started with first understanding the why, then wireframing what that report is going to look like, and then from that, we've designed backwards. So we've said, here's the data that we need to be able to build that wireframed report. Here's where all that data lives. Based on the topography and the architecture that's already in place, this is what I want to build out to be able to gather all of that data together. And so now you've designed all the way backwards from the finished report to where the data lives right now. And once you've designed all those pieces, now your job is to start building forward. And so now you're going to start building your pipelines forward that's going to move that data, gather all that data in one place, and allow you to begin manipulating that data. So once you've gathered all the data together, you're going to start designing a data model. Now, designing a data model is outside the scope of today's conversation, but I will say we do have a great presentation on this coming up by Jason Romans next month. So we'll be publishing that meetup very soon. And so I believe that's April 18th, if I remember correctly. So be sure to sign up for that. It's going to be a great presentation. This is something that is maybe not super easy, but it is definitely foundational. It's really important to get this piece right because it's going to make your life a lot easier or a lot harder based on how well you do at this. And so just the key here, typically simple is better, and things should usually be really intuitive what is in a table for an effective data model. Your data model is going to, contain the relationships between tables. So for example, you might have a person table and a sales table, and you have a person ID that says, oh, here's the person that sold something. And here's the record of all the sales, and here's all the people with all the information about people, right? So that's the relationship between those two is on people. And so you can have tons and tons of different relationships. And so that's how you would build out your business, your data model. The other thing you're going to want to do here is establish what your business logic looks like. with the advent of the new visual calculations, you might want to focus really on actual business logic and not just sort of visual logic. So additional formatting and sort of fancy things that turn into a much more dynamic experience. Keep those, have those, but maybe use the visual calculations where appropriate for those and keep the data model a little bit more pure. But again, that's something that I'll let Jason speak to next month. So as we continue our build forward journey, so we want to build a data model. And so the next thing you want to do is you want to write the actual report, right? So we spent all this time from wireframe, from the wireframe, we've done all these pieces to design backwards. Now we're building forward. Now we're finally getting to the point of actually building the report. And so you want to basically take a stab at building what was in that initial wireframe. Now, I'll be honest with you, in my experience, sometimes some things just don't quite come together for one reason or another. A visual may not make sense, and sometimes you just have to kind of pivot and go in a slightly different direction. That's okay. In my experience, most report consumers were really interested in, am I getting value out of this? Is it making my life easier? They don't really care that you had to pivot and change something on the fly. Let them know, communicate with them, but really, as long as it's meaningful, that's the most important thing. Once you've created a draft of it, then you want to review that with your stakeholders. Now, you might want to first review that with your managers, get some other input from other BI reporters, from other senior management, so that they have a view into what's being presented before you go and present this to the CEO. You might want to let your boss know what you're doing and get some feedback from them. But basically, the point here is once you've finally created the report that you are looking to build, now you want to review that with your stakeholders. Now, at this point, you can certainly put your wireframe on one side of the screen and your report on the other, and you can say, this is what we've delivered and this is what we've delivered against. What this is not supposed to be is a session of, hey, here's what I promised, here's what I gave you, now give me that check mark. Right. This is not supposed to be a litigious exercise. We promised A, we gave you A, we're done. It is an exercise in, this is what we discussed. This is the why behind why we're doing this. This is the report, the wireframe that we agreed that we were going to report. And so here's our best effort at solving that pain point for you. You can walk them through some of the functionality. It's even better if you have them test some of that functionality, really get them invested in the report and get them to start using it. And then typically what is going to happen is they are going to have requests. I don't think I've ever created a BI product, a reporting product, and given it to a stakeholder and them say, yep, cool, I don't need anything else. There is always a request for something else that comes down the pipe, and and they want more. And you know what? Actually, I think that is a mark of success. And the reason I say that is, imagine if you created something and they're like, "Yeah, cool, I'm done. I don't want to, this relationship ends here," right? That's probably not a great thing. If they're saying, "Oh, I love this and I want more. This is really helpful, and I have another pain I want you to help me solve. This is great, but I just need more of it." Like that is the measure of success, and that's really what you're going for, right? So typically what will happen is they're going to give you requests, and then we do the same thing. We iterate over and over again. And so, if they say, make this purple color slightly less purple, you don't need to wireframe that, right? You can just like go into Power BI desktop, change the hex code or whatever, and send it to them and say, hey, I made your adjustments, here you go. But if they start saying, this is great, let's talk about a new visual, let's talk about a whole new page. This is again where you want to go back to this iterative process. You wireframe, you identify the data sources. A lot of that data you're already going to have, and some of it you may not have. So now you need to locate where that data is. You're going to decide on the architecture, how you're going to get that data and bring that into your model. And then now that you've designed that backwards, you start building it forwards. You build your ETL pipelines, incorporate that into your business, your data model, you write out your business logic, create the report, you take it back to your stakeholders, and you review. And typically, again, you're going to have more feedback, more requests, more enhancements. And it's just an iterative process that continues to churn. So what I'll say in that is always keep in mind the why. Why are we doing it? Right? Every time that you go around the cycle, remember the why. And and I think that that is the thing that will help keep you grounded to making sure that what you build matches the pain point that you are here to solve. So, so what I want to do now is I want to give you, so I talked about the wireframing, and I want to dive into that a little bit more. I want to give you guys some examples of some wireframes that I have built that have proven really useful for me. Remember, I said that you can do marker on dry erase board. Like I'm not kidding. Like those are some of my best wireframes. That's my first wireframing approach. When you're in the room with the person, and it can be very collaborative. Sometimes if you're working with the CEO or a senior vice president or something, you may not have the luxury of spending that kind of time with the person. You may have to just create a wireframe with your best guess, send it off to them, and then they give you some feedback back. But if you can have time with them in the room to go over that wireframe, then that I think is really the best approach, because it gets them bought into it, but it also gets them thinking about what they need, why certain things would be helpful, and so that's a really nice approach. And then I'm also going to show you a PowerPoint. This is actually a PowerPoint version of the same report, and I want you guys to think about how well we sort of hit the mark on that. So let's take a look at that. So this is actually the PowerPoint that I did for a travel and entertainment expense report that I built. This was almost 2 years ago now that we first designed this, and so what we've got here on the left side of the screen, you have these are our stacked bar graphs by person. So these would, and then they are stacked by total spend. So it's a Pareto by total spend and broken out by person, and also travel entertainment expense type. So these colored, the legend that you see at the bottom of that is your expense type. So intercity travel would be like airfare, rail, and so forth, so on and so forth. And so you can see the way that it's broken out. And then you've also got travel entertainment by period. So this is by month, and each line is a different year. So if you think back to 2022, they actually wanted to see spend going back to 2019. The reason why 2019 was sort of the last full pre-COVID year, the last sort of full normal year pre-COVID. And so the blue line there is 2019. Should have included a legend. There is a legend in the actual report, but it would have been nice to have a legend in the mock-up. But didn't think about adding one. And so the blue line is 2019. So that's our sort of last normal COVID year. You got the yellow that is 2020. You can see what happens there, right? It's normal for the first few months and then drops off a cliff. And then it's near zero until sort of late summer, early fall of 2021, which is that purple line. And then it starts to pick up, returns to normal. There's a little bit of a drop off in January, because there's always a drop off in January for us, and it starts to pick back up throughout the year. And then that sort of brings us to the middle of 22, when this wireframe was created. You've got some more numerical data in the bottom right. So being a financial services firm, people love tables of data. It's not my preference, but that's what stakeholders really like. So hey, they want tables of data, you give them tables of data. And again, sort of broken out by person there, full year 2019, 2020, 2021. Then it's got, because 2022 would have been the current year at the time, you've got year to date for 22 and year to date for the previous year, 21. And you've got a change dollar amount that is the delta between those last two columns, year to date 21, year to date 22. When we added on new years, this became too busy. They wanted to remove years. And so the obvious choice would have been 2019. But actually what they did was they removed 2020. The spend was so low, there's nothing really to manage to for 2020, but they wanted to keep 2019 as a full year comparison to 2023, because that was sort of the last kind of quote normal year. And then I think when 23 came around, I think we also kept 2019, got rid of 21s. We had 2019, 22, 23, and then 23 year to date, 24 year to date. Slicer at the top for T&E expense type if you wanted to see that. So that would sort of filter the two visuals on the right. The period is a selector for the calculation for the graph on the left. And so it's current year to date, prior year to date, prior full year. So if we go back in time to 2022, so prior full year would be 2021 full year. And then what they call, and this is again a common term in financial services, what they call prior, a previous to prior year. So in this case, it would be 2020. So you've got 2020 full year, 2021 full year, 21 partial, and 22 partial. And that only affects the graph on the left. The reason why it doesn't affect the graph in the upper right, well, because that is by month, right? And so it wouldn't really make a lot of sense to do prior year to date or current year to date. All you're really doing is just removing portions of the graph. And that doesn't really add anything. It only subtracts. So it didn't really make a lot of sense to have that slicer filter the upper right. By the way, that's a facet that may not be obvious when you're first thinking about this. It may not be obvious when you first design this, and so that's just something that, like, as you start to think through it, then that's the sort of thing that kind of comes to you as you begin to build it out, and why spending a little bit of time on a wireframe like this can be helpful. And then the PMG slicer is just like an organizational slicer for my company. So this is the sort of plussed up version of the wireframe that we put in our documentation. So what did it look like when it was just on the dry erase board, which we also added to our documentation? So it looked like this. So I'll let you be the judge of, how well we stuck to that. I can tell you that the end report, obviously can't show the end report, but it looks basically exactly like this. One thing you'll notice that is different between this and the PowerPoint is this has a date slicer, a date scrubber that we did not wind up with in the PowerPoint. So why did we take it out? Well, it turns out it just it wasn't really very meaningful. The table in the bottom right has a form of time frame in the columns that it uses. The upper right is all about time frames, spent by month for multiple years. It really only mattered for the graph on the left. And so instead of time, it doesn't, if you could pick August of 21 through February of 22, but that doesn't really make any sense, right? So rather than giving them something kind of convoluted and complicated to pick from on the slicer that would just muddle things and make it very confusing, that was why we went with that period selector, that current year to date, prior full year, previous to prior year, that drop down selector. And so rather than doing a date scrubber, that's why we went to that option. It's something that we hadn't figured out yet when we were doing the wireframe on the dry erase board, but something that we did figure out by the time that we were doing the PowerPoint wireframe. So that's wireframing. Absolutely crucial step. You really have to do this, because if you don't, the problem is you don't know what you're building. You don't know what you're working towards. You don't know the data that you need, and so you don't know where to go get data and information. So this, I can promise you, is the most important step in all of it. And again, I can't guarantee you that if you do a proper wireframe that you're going to succeed, but I can just about guarantee you that if you don't do a proper wireframe, you're going to have a really difficult time of things. So one of the other points that I made was taking copious notes and putting these wireframes, dry erase boards, image, the PowerPoint into some kind of documentation is really important, and those future enhancement requests that people are going to have. So how do you do that? Well, so let's talk about some of those methods of documentation. So I'm a big believer in right sizing a solution to the problem at hand. And what I mean by that is not every not every body of work requires the same level of governance, the same level of sophistication, the same level of overhead. If you're creating reporting for the CEO that's going to go in your SEC reporting, then Sarbanes-Oxley compliance and auditability become very important features. And and you need to have a lot of governance, a lot of oversight, a lot of documentation. You might need to have auditability in changes that you create. And so, that's a very sort of heavyweight solution to the problem. You might have some simple report that gets produced once a year, for some random guy who asks for a bit of help. And you might not need the sophistication for that. So, given that, I want to go through a spectrum of options for documenting your requirements. So, one of the oldest methods of managing any project, right, is just literally writing stuff down. If you think about your grocery list, it is a list is a tool that has been in use literally for thousands of years, and it is an incredibly effective, simple thing. And you can go get a physical notebook. I've got mine here. This is nicer-ish, not super nice, but nicer, kind of leather bound, faux leather bound thing. And you can certainly do use that. I like that personally. I've got a guy on my team who gets old printer paper and flips it over and writes on the back of it. That works too. Whatever works for you is what works for you. And some of the benefits of it is it's pretty cheap. You don't really need a ton of training or investment in it. There are some techniques like bullet journaling and so forth that you can spend some time studying and training on. And I don't really get a ton of use out of that myself. Not to knock it. If it works for you, then that's great. Some of the cons is that you can't share your notes super easily. You can't attach digital files. So there are some cons, and you can certainly work with digital notebooks like OneNote, for example, that can help with a few of those items. Another tool is an action log. And so I've used tons of action logs in the past. This is not one that I created, but this is an Excel based action log. And one nice thing is it's very intuitive, very easy to understand. It doesn't take a ton of work it doesn't take a ton of effort to get up and running with this. Typically, everybody that you're interacting with, right? If they're using Power BI, they got Excel somewhere. I mean, virtually everybody's got access to Excel somewhere, some way, somehow, right? So most people can access this and update it. Or in a meeting, you can just simply have one person who's the note taker, the action log updater, and you go and you update it, open actions, you review things and take any new actions. And at the end of the meeting, you just go over any new actions that you've documented. Again, it's super effective. It is dead simple. And it works really well. One of the main problems is version control. That you've got this file, you might put it on SharePoint. I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody overwrite the action log. You lose actions because somebody's doesn't understand how to lock a file in SharePoint and then unlock it when they're done, and it becomes kind of a frustrating mess. There are other solutions out here that basically do the same thing, but address those versions without adding a ton of overhead. But I'll give you one thing that definitely goes another level, and that is some kind of ticketing system like Azure DevOps or Jira. These are really tools that are built for developers, built by developers for developers. They are robust, they are scalable. You can use them in a team that is just you. You can use them in a team that's 1,000 people. you're not going to have any problems with version control with this. One caveat is that there is a steep learning curve to these. You get up that learning curve fairly quickly, but it definitely takes a moment to kind of get used to it and figure out how to do what you want to do, but even more, what it is that you're supposed to do. And if you have one new person, they can sort of learn from the others, and they can learn the culture of how you use a tool like Azure DevOps. But if you've never used it, either one of them in your organization, bringing this in for a new team, you can really develop some bad habits. So just something to be mindful of. I will say some of these tools historically, like so the predecessor to the Azure DevOps called Team Foundation Server can be a little bit expensive. Azure DevOps is like $5-6 per person per month, so it's not super expensive if this is meaningful for you. And I'll also say, you do tend to get out of it what you put into it. So the more effort that you put into to creating and keeping up to date the tickets that you build in a system like this, the more value that you're going to get out of this. You can do things like sprint planning. You can do burn down, where basically what you could say is, this sprint is going to be it's going to be 4 weeks long. So that's, 40 hours a week times 160 hours, per person times 3 people. Oh, Bob's going to be on vacation these days, so let's take that capacity out. Maybe you haircut by 20% because you figure people are going to have meetings and so forth. And you can basically say, that this person is allocated for the month of January, February, and halfway through March. So if you want to give them something to do, well, you've either got to wait until late March, or you've got to, shift some things around. And so it starts to facilitate that kind of conversation. And that's a conversation that would be completely impossible in a different kind of tool. I've used both Azure DevOps and Jira. They're both wonderful systems. They really work for what they want to do very, very well within those caveats that I've already talked about. If you're building something that's going to take you 2 or 3 weeks, this ain't the tool for you. But if you're building something if you're running a team, that this is what they do. They build reports day in and day out, and you're building really robust reports that are viewed by 1,000 people. You're going to spend a year on something. This is the kind of tool that you're going to want, probably. So these are just some of the options that you have. And like I say, I encourage you to right size the sophistication of your solution to the to what it is that you're actually building. So that's what I've got. Oh, sorry, one more thing. And that is that you want to communicate with your stakeholders. You there are going to be delays. There are always delays in these types of projects because there are things that you cannot foresee. The key, I think, is that you have to inform your stakeholders of what the timeline is and any changes to that timeline. The value in doing that is they might actually be willing to help you with something. If you need access to some system, someone's not willing to give you access to that system to get the data that you need. By communicating that, hey, we have this holdup, it's delaying us, I can't move forward without this, they can say, all right, cool. Well, I'm a senior vice president. I can send some emails. I can get this ball rolling, right? But it also helps with managing that expectation. The other thing is under promise and over deliver, right? If you say, I'm going to be done with this in 10 days and it takes you 15, that's a problem. If you say it's going to take me 15 and you get done in 12, they'll love you for it, right? You know, people, they don't want you to pad your estimates really, really high. And I've certainly seen some teams who do that. They'll double, triple even their estimates for how long something should take. That's maybe not great, but you also don't want to overpromise and under-deliver, right? That's a recipe for disaster. And the last point that I'll leave you with is transparency. Just being honest with your stakeholders, and and most of them will understand. They've had struggles with projects in the past. This is, your project is not the only project that's had difficulty, that's had delays. Just communicate be honest with them, be realistic in what you promise and deliver to them, and be transparent when you talk to them. Okay, so that's everything that I've got for you guys. So with that, I just want to remind you about the dashboard in a day coming up Saturday, June 1st. Again, this is for beginners, may or may not be for you. If it's not for you, I encourage you, please send them that URL, send them the QR code that goes to the same place. It's just a form, put in your name, email to sort of say, to declare your interest. And then I'll be in touch to folks with more details later on. So thank you guys very much for your time. I appreciate it. Hope this was helpful. And if you got any questions, I'll definitely stick around for a minute.
I did have one in the chat, Michael. What are the one or two books that you like related to requirements gathering?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know that I've actually read any books on requirements gathering. I will say that where I have gained a lot of knowledge is actually in the philosophy of project management. And so and so if you Google something called a PMP, project management professional, this is a degree certification that you can pursue, and so there's a lot. You literally get like a curriculum that you have to go through, and I'm not suggesting that you go through that, but there's a ton of stuff in the field of PMP, in the field of project management, that I think would be really valuable, because at the end of the day, that's really what you're managing here. Is there is a project of build me a report that solves this pain point, right? And so, any project management professional will tell you, right, understanding the why behind the project, one of the most crucial steps in future success of achieving that the desired outcomes of that project. So that'd be the thing that I would really focus on, is sort of things in line with project management. And there's also, like, if you have a chance to maybe take like a training course in in Scrum or Agile, that sort of a thing. Those are things that will really allay themselves to tools like Azure DevOps and Jira very, very well. And so I would encourage people to look into best practices in the use of those tools, best practices in the performance of a platform like Scrum or Agile. And I think that those could really be useful. Again, that is going to be more useful in things like the very large projects that will go on for months, maybe involve multiple people, teams of people. And so that's what I do, is I manage a team of several developers, and yeah, and so we're building reports for the CEO, for heads of strategic business units, components that face Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, and we're presenting to SEC, and we're building reports that go to over 1,000 users. So it really needs to be kind of robust and bulletproof. And so for us, tools like that really make a lot of sense. If that's not what you're doing, a tool like ADO may be overkill for what you do. Project management might be overkill for what you do. But I think there could be a lot of philosophies, a lot of meaningful nuggets in those philosophies that could help you manage your work a little bit better.
Anybody else have any more questions? If you do, feel free to drop it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask as well. All right. Well, then with that, thank you, Michael. Great presentation.
Thank you, Michael.
We'll get the copy at the deck, and one more question has come in. What are your thoughts on Planner with small projects? I'm assuming you're talking Microsoft Planner.
I have not used it. I did recently see, I'm a big fan of the company called Pragmatic Works. They do a lot of Microsoft data stack training, so a lot of Power Platform training. There's a lot of new stuff in Fabric lately. And strangely, slightly outside of their normal box, they did, I think it's an hour and a half long course. It might be longer than that in Microsoft Project. And I've been meaning to watch that actually. I haven't had a chance to watch that lately. That's not Microsoft Planner. I'm not familiar with Microsoft Planner. I can't really speak to that one. I suspect Microsoft Project is probably overkill, or conversely, just not exactly tuned for DevOps type of work. I think a tool like ADO or Jira might work a little bit better for you. And like I say, if your company will allow it, you can get it for $5 per user per month. So nowadays it's pretty cost effective. Planner might already be in your Microsoft Office 365 licensing, so that might also be a great tool. I just haven't personally had a ton of experience with it, but that's a great idea. I'll have to check that out.
James, I dabbled with that when it first came out.
Mhm.
It's probably been 6 or so years ago, and it basically feels like Microsoft's take on Trello. So uh, if Trello is a tool that works for you, Planner may work. I haven't necessarily found either of those to work great once I start getting beyond a very small team. Sometimes very small, meaning myself, a team of one. So
I'm curious, Michael, have
good
you ever
question.
used ADO or Jira?
We're Jira right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Any other questions? All right. With that, thank you all for joining us today. So glad to have you. We'll get a copy of the deck and make the video recording available on YouTube here very soon. We'll see you next month to join with Jason as he talks about the basics of building a data model. It's going to be a really good talk. You're going to want to tune in for that one. And just a reminder as well to keep an eye peeled for any surveys so we can help determine whether or not we're ready to go in person. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys. Take care. So, Michael, you were saying that you guys are a Jira shop. What, um, how would you feel if they took Jira away? Like how valuable is that to your book of work?
Mm, we're actually fairly new into it.
Mm,
So if it was going to get taken away uh, and have, I'd say, moderate impact at this point. Um,
mm.
though I don't want it to go away. So,
You guys have Bitbucket?
no, we've not been using Bitbucket.
So so they're both Atlassian products. So they integrate really well.
Mhm.
I was at a DevOps place where they used Jira for their issue management and Bitbucket for their source control.
Mhm.
Um, that was a yeah that was a fun place to work. They really had a culture of using Jira very well,
Right.
and Bitbucket as well. So ADO will do both of those things. It'll do do source control, the ticketing, it'll do pipelines, all of that. Have you done any work with release pipelines between some sort of Git repository and Power BI workspaces?
No, not yet. Uh, gotta get repository set up on a Azure server.
Mm.
kind of old school, but probably stick with Git because we can migrate it to the cloud and be able to integrate them
Yeah.
across workspaces. I think as some stuff we've got coming in the future that could be pretty valuable.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man. All right.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. We appreciate it.
Yep.
All right,
Thanks,
take care, Mike.
everybody.
Bye.
See you soon.